It was there that we fought and won. Defending Federation and Rhodesia. It was there that we fought and won.
Well, I've got with me Captain Graham Swart today, who actually happened to have been on the same officer cadets course as Andre Skeepers, who we spoke to last, and who's been a guest several times. So we'll start with your early life, Graham, just where you grew up and how you ended up in the army.
Okay, thank you, Hannes. Thank you for having me, and thank you for a great series. It's been wonderful to watch all these interviews.
Thank you.
I was born and brought up in Salisbury. I went to a number of different junior schools and ended up going to boarding school in my last year of junior school in Gatuma at Sir John Kennedy. My mom said, when you finished at Sir John Kennedy, you go across the road to Jamison High School. And after a few months of having been in Gatuma and seen Jamison High School, I went home and I said, Mom, I ain't going to Jamison. So a lot of the guys were at school were going to Guinea Fowl. So I said to Mom, please get me into Guinea Fowl. I want to go to Guinea Fowl. And so I ended up at Guinea Fowl High School from 70 to 75. And yeah, at the end of 1975, when we were preparing for our final exams, and we all got a letter, the guys who were going to be leaving school, and many of us had received call-up papers for January. We got a letter which had been written and signed by General Walls, not an individual one, obviously. It was an open mail, and where he said, you know, look, the chances are that national service will be increased, which it was, and would we not consider joining the army on a permanent basis? And I had no idea what I wanted to do then, so I decided to try for the OSB, the officer selection course, which was in the January the following year, 1976. So I went on that course, the selection board, and I got a fail watch, which meant come back again in a year's time and we think maybe you'll have what it is. So I went back home and I went into the Army Recruitment Office in Salisbury, and I saw he was then a Lieutenant Alf Logan, who was the recruiting officer. And I said, I want to sign up for 3 years to join the army. So he said, okay, bring your little suitcase tomorrow and off you go into the army for 3 years. So I joined RLI with intake 150, which I think was one of the biggest intakes they'd ever had. There was certainly well over 200 guys in the intake. So I started in that intake with them and did the basic training, the usual 6 weeks of drill and shine parades and change parades and discipline, what have you. And then obviously through the complete basic training, and I was then posted to 1 Commando for the rest of the year. And at the end of the year, I'd schlepped the MAG around, I'd done Fire Force, I'd done an external operation, so I decided, no, I want to go back on that OSB and go and try again for the officers course. So I went to Roy Makovich, who was our CO at 1 Command at the time, and I said, sir, I'd like to go back and try the OSB. And of course he said, with the greatest of pleasure. So I went off to School of Infantry again for the OSB in 1977 and passed that. A very good man who's no longer with us, Terry Hammond, was one of the directing staff. And he was the one who said to me, he said, I'm going to pass you, but you're going to have to work very hard to get through this course. And I said, I will do so. And many years later, I met up with Terry again when he was CEO of 2 RAR, and he was so happy to see me at 1 RAR. So yeah, passed the OSBI and started the cadet course later on in January 1977. And yeah, it was a hard course, 13 months. The first phase was particularly hard, and having been through the RLI basic training course, this was, which I thought was difficult at the time, this was like 10 times worse. And I thought our bed layouts were difficult in RLI, but when we came to do bed layouts on this cadet course, I don't think we ever slept in our beds for the first 10 weeks, making sure that the bed stayed in the best condition possible. So yeah, it was very tough. We started, I think, somewhere around about 55 or 60 guys started the course who had passed the OSBIs. And in a very short space of time, the numbers whittled down fairly quickly because guys realized that this is not what we expected. This is a lot harder than is expected. And some guys just decided that's it, we're leaving the course. Some guys never progressed past the first few weeks and were RTU'd. So yeah, it was a very difficult thing. And certainly by the time we reached the end of the first phase and going into the second phase, we had whittled down to 22 guys. And at the end of the second phase, 4 more guys were RTU'd from the course. And so we were down to the 18, which was the final number that was commissioned in February the following year, 10th of February 1978. And yeah, we had a fantastic bunch of guys on the course. Andre was one of them, and there were about 5 or 6 of us who'd had previous military experience in Andre with SAS, and there was a guy by the name of Hamish McIntyre. I'm sure you would know his father, Derry McIntyre. Hamish and I roomed together in the course, and we had all had previous experience. So we were the sort of nucleus of the guys that helped to make sure that the barrack room was done to the best perfect way. And because we had to have a situation where we had to pass off the square. And there was a gentleman by the name of Leon Jacobs, who was the commandant of the School of Infantry, a fine soldier who had come up through the ranks and was extremely strict. And he failed the previous course. They failed their first attempt at the passing off the square at the end of the 10 weeks. And they had to do another week before they passed off. We passed off first time. And we had our instructor was Charlie Davies, also ex-RLI. And he made sure that our drill was up to spec, our barrack room was up to spec. So yeah, we passed first time and we were so chuffed about that. And yeah, it was just a fantastic course and a fantastic camaraderie between the 18 of us when we eventually finished off the course.
And then you were given a choice. You were asked to pick where you'd like to go. Well,
we had to write a letter asking for the choice of the units that we wanted to go to. I don't know if Andre has ever mentioned in any of his interviews that when he wrote his letter, he wrote there, you had to put in 3 choices of the different units that you wanted to go to. And so many of the guys put in their RLI, RAR, whatever it was, whatever their choices were. And of course, Andre, having come from SAS, he wrote the number 1 SAS, number 2 SAS, number 3 SAS. And of course, he was called back into the office and said, Skippers, you cannot go to SAS directly from here. You have to first go to another unit and then redo the selection. Redo your letter and put in your choices. So anyway, eventually he was sent off to RLI, and well, the rest we know from. So we all put in choices, and we were, not everyone got their choice, but when they said to me, I'm being posted to 1 RAR, I was very happy. I was quite happy about that, going to RAR.
Who was your OC when you went to 1 RAR?
When we went to 1 RAR, it was Colonel Mike Shute. He was the CO at the time. And say 4 of us went there. So each one of us was posted into each one of the infantry companies. I was posted to D Company, 1 RAR, which was being commanded by a guy who was an ex-American military guy, Glenn Reed. He was in charge of our company then. And yeah, I was made a platoon commander under his command in D Company.
And tell us a little bit about your time in the RAR.
Yeah, okay. We were, as I say, we were in platoons, looking after a platoon of soldiers. And at that stage, RAR was mainly doing the footwork, patrolling work, OPs, that kind of thing. In the war, I remember my first bush trip was out to Lupani, and when you walked around in Lupani, I mean, it was just flat. There were tall trees. You couldn't see anything, and it was just, and the sand, the thick sand, it was quite difficult patrolling through those areas. And later on, when RLI and SAS and Toulouse Scouts became more involved in the external operations, then we started to be more regular on Fire Force. And we actually, I was given an order to take my platoon on parachute training course, so that we could do the first and second wave of Fire Force. And unfortunately, I had a real lot of bad luck with parachuting with my platoon. We went to New Serum to do our course, and during our training jumps, one of my guys exited the Dakota, but he exited in quite a bad way, and the static line wrapped around the butt of his MAG, and it burned through, and he fell, but he was falling head over heels, and you could see from the ground, he tried to pull his reserve chute, and there was a little pilot chute on a spring which popped out, but because he was spinning, the reserve chute wrapped around him, and of course he fell to the ground and was killed. So that was a pretty poor thing. And then we were on Fire Force in Bandura, and I think when you interviewed Ken Norton and he was talking about the operations that he was doing, that I think it was Op Enterprise. I think we were in support of him being on that line in Bandura. And my platoon was on para duty that day, and the Fire Force got called out early in the morning. But at Bandura, there was no protection for the Dakota like they had at Matoko or Grand Reef. So every evening, the Dakota would fly back to New Serum, and then he would fly out first thing in the morning. So of course, once the K cars and the G cars had deployed, they made contact on the ground, and Glenn Reed immediately called in the paras to come in. So we kitted up on the runway, and the Air Force guys called the pilot on the Dakota and said to him, when you land, come to the end, but don't turn off your engines because you're going to go straight out. The guys are getting kitted up now, and they will hop on the plane and off you go to the contact scene. Not being au fait with all the pilots' things that they have to do on their aeroplanes when they land. The plane landed, we jumped into the Dakota, he flew off to the contact scene. When the K cars, the G cars had deployed their guys, they would then fly around to find a suitable DZ for us to jump into. So they would land, one of the choppers would land, measure the the height on the ground with their altimeter, fly up to 500 feet, take that reading and give it to the Dakota pilot and say, that's the height you need to come in on. And then they would obviously drop smoke to see wind direction and what have you. So the pilot put that reading in, and we went in and we got the green light to jump. And I still remember, my MAG gunner was in front of me, and then I jumped behind him. And as I was going down the wash from the propeller, I looked and I couldn't believe it, and I saw my MAG gunner was already hitting the ground. And I said, no, man, this is not 500 feet. And, I remember at New Serum, when we used to jump, 16 guys used to jump there. It was virtually a kilometer long from where the first guy landed to the last guy. We had all landed within about 120 meters of each other. And I went and I looked. We had landed in a millie field. There were some contours around the millie field. My guys were up against the contours. There were broken legs, broken arms, and 2 guys actually died a couple of days later from their wounds. And what we understand happened, and I'm not going to put the blame on Air Force or anybody else like that, but what we understand happened was that the pilot never reset his altimeter when he landed in Bandura. Mm-hmm. And he just took off. And when he was given the reading, it was out. And they estimated that we jumped between 180 and 160 feet. So as I put in the book, Chibaya Moyo, we stepped out of the deck onto the DZ.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your injuries, Graham?
I got a couple of compressed vertebrae in my neck and my back. The doctor at that time, of course, the things that they used to do in those days were not as good as what they can do now. And the doctor said to me, he said, this is an injury that you're going to have to live with in your 50s and your 60s. Thankfully, I'm not suffering too badly, but I was sent back and I was medically downgraded. So I actually went from the operational company. I went to battalion headquarters, and I was helping out on in an admin officer role. And the adjutant went on a course to the UK at the time. So I stepped in as acting adjutant, and I was also helping out with headquarter company. So I was doing the admin jobs, and at the same time I was doing physiotherapy at Mpila Hospital in Bulawayo.
So Graham, now you're talking about somebody going to the UK. So we're into post-ceasefire now.
Yeah.
You now find yourself in the newly integrated Zimbabwe army, or process of integration.
Yeah. If we can just slightly before that, there was a small fire force that was deployed at Wankie, and I cannot remember the reasons now why I was there, but it was after the Lancaster House Agreement, and all the gooks were being marshaled into these assembly points, and Nkomo brought all his equipment into Rhodesia. And I was at Wankie, and we got the news that this goods train had been pushed into the debt siding in Wankie. And we said to one of the pilots, please take us up and let's go and have a look. So we flew around the debt siding, and then when I looked at this lot, I thought to myself, I realized we were so lucky to have had the Zambezi River and Kariba and what have you, that there was no way they could get this equipment across. There was tanks, there was armored personnel carriers, there was anti-aircraft guns. There must have been about 40 or 50 wagons in the siding with all this equipment. It was all covered with tarpaulins, but I mean, you could see the tanks with the guns sticking out from the turret, and it was just an incredible sight to have a look at. And I suddenly realized, phew, and listening to middies talking about the conventional Zipra trained guys that they were fighting against in Vic Falls, I realized that this was not just a ragtag bunch of gooks with an AK running around the countryside. This was a proper force. Shortly after that, when all these guys were moved into the assembly points, the biggest assembly point in our area was at Lupani Mission. And one of the things was that we had to have, the brigade wanted a Rhodesian army officer to be liaison in the camp on a daily basis. So we, being the only unit in that area at the time, each of us junior officers had to take it in turns and go there for 3 weeks and be the liaison to report back any situations that might have been occurring and what have you. So myself and a small stick of 8 guys, we drove out to this assembly point, and now suddenly, things are now different. That they are walking around with their AKs and SKSs and RPGs, and there's nothing you could do about it. So I was introduced to the commander of the camp, and we used to have a meeting every day. And I got talking to him one day, and I just mentioned to him that I had seen all this equipment coming across from Zambia. And he said to me, would you like to go and see it? So I said, well, if it's not too far away from here, I'd love to. So he arranged for me to go to Gwai River Mine, and he came with me. The funny thing was that he came into my room at about 2 o'clock in the morning, standing over my bed with his AK in his hand, and I thought, oh, now I'm in trouble. And he said to me, okay, we go tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock. We go to go and see the thing. And that was where, again, I saw that these guys were properly disciplined. They had decent uniforms. They carried their weapons with them, and they had put anti-aircraft weaponry dug in positions on the route into the Gwai River Mine. Their headquarters was in the Gwai River Mine. So he took me right in, and that was where I first met Charles Gray. Now, Charles Gray was a colored guy who I understand was previously from Rhodesia. I cannot verify that. I believe that he committed a crime of some kind in Bulawayo, and because he didn't want to go to jail and face the government, he ducked out to Zambia, and he joined Zipra, and he became one of their commanders. So I met him there. There were others, but I remember particularly Charles Gray in the meeting him, and he showed me around. He showed me the vehicles. They had these GAZ vehicles with a GAZ, an armored personnel carrier. It had. He took me inside, showed me they could inflate and deflate the tires from inside the vehicle, depending on the type of terrain they were traveling around in. And very similar, almost a carbon copy of what the Rattle was. I think the Rattle was probably based very much on the GAZ, because that was developed much more long before the Rattle was. Because when we went on our trip down south as cadets, every time we came to a unit in South Africa, the first thing they wanted to do was show us their Rattle. And he showed me around this GAZ vehicle. It was a six-wheeled vehicle. And I saw all the other things there. And then, as I say, I realized that we would have been stretched to the limit if they had come across in a conventional type manner. The only place that they could have done it was to have come across through Botswana. But even then, I think they would have had difficulty in trying to do that. But certainly once the once things had changed, all this equipment came across. They positioned themselves at Kwai River Mine. I finished my 3-week stint at Lupani. I went back to barracks, and by then Mick McKenna had taken over as CEO of 1 RAR, and I have the greatest respect for that man. He was such a good leader. He was RAR through and through. And of course, we knew him at School of Infantry. He was OC of Cadet Wing for a short while we were there on our course. And then he left to go to Grey Scouts. I know, again, Clive mentioned it in his, when he took over as Grey Scouts, and Bruce Snellgar took over as OC of Cadet Wing when we finished off our course. But Mick was, he was a fantastic man. And at that stage, we had been told to remove our colors, to remove our insignia, to remove everything about RAR that we had. And it was almost a weekly trip that Brigadier Shute would come out to the barracks, would sit in Mick McKenna's office and say, "Mick, you need to take off your insignia." And Mick would say, "No, I'm not going to do it. We are keeping our colors." The only thing we did was to remove the Rhodesia flash that was on our kit. But I mean, we retained our badge, the shield, the spear, and the knobkerrie, which had Rhodesian African rifles still on it. We retained our colors. We retained everything about RAR, except at the gate, our sign was changed from 1st Battalion Rhodesian African Rifles to 1st Battalion 11 Infantry Battalion, as it was then renamed. But Mick stood his ground and he said, "No, I'm not changing my colors. I'm keeping the colors as they were." And after independence, or shortly before independence in 1980, he called a lot of us officers together, and he said, "Guys, I know that at any time you can put your ticket in, you can leave, you can go and do whatever you want to do. But I'm asking you, please, I want you to stay for a year, and let's make sure that our soldiers are looked after, because we were scared of what was going to happen to them when the changes started happening." So he said, "Please, guys, I'm asking you to stay as a nucleus." And it wasn't just white officers. We had some black officers there as well. Sergeant majors who had become lieutenants on the various officers courses during that time. Moses Pongweni was one of the guys in my company when I first arrived in D Company. He was an ex-sergeant major. He became a lieutenant. Brilliant soldier, absolutely brilliant soldier. And Mick McKenna said to us, he said, "Please, guys, I'm asking you, will you stay with them for at least a year? After 1 year, you're then free to go and do whatever you need to do." So there was a small nucleus of us, I think about 10 or 15 guys. We said, "Okay, we'll hang around." And that's when I was sent on the combat team commanders course at School of Infantry. And it was one of the first courses that was run, which was an integrated course between the ZIPRA and the ZANLA so-called officers. We had about six guys on our course. And the course was run by Pat Lawless and Major Creel. And we had some difficult times with them, because when we used to discuss tactics and things like that, they used to disagree with what ours were based on our previous military experience. And we had some difficult times with them where they said, no, what you did was not the best way possible. This was the right way possible, etc., etc. They never had rank. They only had titles like Company 2IC, Company CO, whatever it might have been, that they had on the course. So I finished the course early in December. And Trevor Desfountain was the commandant of the School of Infantry. And he said to me, he said, would I consider coming to School of Infantry as a training officer? So I said, okay, obviously I need to go back to Bulawayo and go and speak to them there. I went back to Bulawayo. I went and spoke to Mick McKenna, and Mick McKenna said to me, no ways you're going to School of Infantry. You're going to be my adjutant. So I then stepped into the role of the adjutant full time until I finished in April 1981.
Graham, I know you were involved in it. It's quite an interesting confrontation that took place. In fact, it was probably a watershed moment in the country's history. But the Zipra assault on Bulawayo, and the battle really that took place around Entumbani township. Can you just talk us through the lead up to that and what actually happens? I know there was an interesting battle, an armored battle, in fact, took place, which a lot of people don't know about. So maybe just talk us through the events of that time.
Okay. While I was on the combat team commanders course, again, the Zanla and Zipra were trying to integrate their forces into in various camps in and around Bulawayo. There was one camp on the Vic Falls Road, just near the racing circuit. There was a camp out at Entumbani, which was on the road from Bulawayo to Salisbury or Gwello. I think there was one near Essex Vale. And of course, there was this big one in the Entumbani township. They had actually built these sort of prefabricated barracks and enclosed them with diamond mesh fencing wire. And the idea was that they were trying to integrate Zanla and Zipra forces into one unit. And yeah, there was great difficulty with that, where they couldn't agree with each other. And while I was on the combat team commanders course, the first difficulty arose in Entumbani, and the Brigadier Shoot only had one RAR to call on to come in and quell any difficult situations. So Mick McKenna and the whole battalion was called in and to sort out the problems. As I say, I was on the combat team commanders course, but came back shortly after that. And then we started experiencing these mutinies and insurrections on a regular basis in all these camps. We had to go to the one on the Vic Falls Road. We had to go and sort them out. But we were not allowed to have a heavy hand because people didn't want to say, well, it's the previous regime's army that's still taking it out on the guys coming in. So we basically had to sort of separate them. And that one on the Vic Falls Road, I remember we pushed them apart. We took their weapons away from them and put them on a big pile in some open ground. And when we had finished, Mick McKenna said, okay, well, we've separated them. We've taken away their weapons. What do you want us to do now? And the order came through that we were to leave them because their own command had to come and sort them out. And Mick McKenna still said, but hang on, if we leave these guys sitting here facing each other with all their weaponry close by, I mean, aren't we just going to leave another problem? He said, no, the Zipra and the Zanla command must come in and sort them out themselves. It's got to be a job for them to do. So Mick McKenna said, okay, guys, off we go back to barracks. And we were saying, but geez, this is crazy. Anyway, sure enough, a couple of hours later, I think a lot of them at that camp picked up their weapons and all headed straight to Entumbani, because that night we got called in again as they were starting to have a go at each other. But after the first Entumbani situation, which happened, I think, about November, there was a hill overlooking the Entumbani township. There was a beer hall complex on this hill. And Brigadier Shute said to us, he said, I need you guys to put in a company of troops on a rotation basis to watch over, because you had a direct view from this beer hall on this hill, direct view over the camp at the time. So each of our companies, again, on a rotation basis, I think it was about 3 weeks, would go and sit up on the hill. Our support company put their mortars in there, put their anti-tank platoon with the recoilless rifles, was all put in there to be on standby in the event of something happening. And when the second Entumbani happened in February 1981, our good friend Major Lionel Dyke was in charge with his company on top of the hill there. And he saw the shooting that was taking place, and a shot rang out over his company's position. So he radioed through to back to our depot, to the barracks. He said to the radio operator, he said, tell Sunray they are shooting each other and I am returning fire now. So of course, by the time we got to town, Lionel Dyke had just about obliterated the whole camp. Not that bad, but I mean, you know, he had opened fire on them to try and obviously stop whatever was going on. Mick McKenna picked me up and we went through to Brady Barracks in his car, and we called the company commanders and said to them, right, get your guys ready on the trucks and into Brady Barracks, and to be on standby for what was going to happen. And at that stage, by the time we arrived at Brady Barracks, as he was Brigadier Shute then, was in the operations room. We went in there, and there were various other commanders from, there was police, there was an Air Force guy, and they had a Zanler and a Zipra liaison officer in the same room as well. And we feel quite sure that all that was happening was whatever decisions were being made at the time, that information was being passed on to whoever. Because all of a sudden, the armor which was stationed, which had now moved to part of the armor, had moved from Guy River Mine to Dave Drake's battleground at Essexvale. And Dave Drake was phoning Brigadier Shute and saying to him, listen, there are vehicles leaving this camp heading towards Bulawayo. And the first news we got was that 3 gas vehicles had driven into Bulawayo. We were sure that the destination was Entumbani, but we were not 100% sure. But one of these vehicles had gone through one of the intersections, and one of the wheels had come off. So it had stopped, come to a halt, and this vehicle was in town. The guys had debussed, and they were making their way to Entumbani. And the next thing is Dave Drake called us and said, guys, there's another 3 vehicles that are leaving Essexvale now. And after the first Entumbani, we were given a troop of armored cars, an Eland 90, and I think it was called a Ferret, the smaller one, from armored cars. And there was this Australian guy, a sergeant in charge of them. For obvious reasons, we named him Skippy. And we said to him, go out onto the road, the Essexvale Road, and position yourself. We sent him a couple of platoons of guys to go with him. And they positioned on the road, just across the road from the Ascot Centre in Bulawayo, just before the big intersection where Milton School was, and the Holiday Inn, and that's it. They positioned there. And of course, the troops were going around shooting out the streetlights because they were sitting on the side of the road. It was still dark. at that time. And so they were shooting out the streetlights to try and put themselves in a position of darkness. And as I don't know if you know that road from Essexvale into Bulawayo. As you're coming into Bulawayo, there's a very sharp, almost like a chicane on a racetrack, a very sharp series of bends near a drive-in cinema. So of course, here we were on the side of the road, and we said, "Skippy, be ready." And we saw the lights of the first vehicle come around the corner and come heading straight towards us. We said, "Skippy, take him out." And he lined it up, an HE round, direct hit on the first vehicle, exploded into a ball of flame and stopped but virtually in the middle of the road where it was. So we said, "Okay, fine." The second vehicle came around the corner, and here's this BTR 152 burning in the middle of the road. He just kept coming, and we said, "Skippy, take him out." And he lined him up, direct hit in the middle of the windscreen, second vehicle taken out on the side of the road. So we waited. Sure enough, there come the lights of the third vehicle. And he came and he tried to maneuver between these two vehicles. We said, "Skippy, take him out." And took out 3 BTR 152s with troops in the back. The platoon went down and they took care of the troops that were in the back that were still alive. And yeah, that was, thank goodness for the armored cars, because I mean, that guy was just an absolute whiz with that Elan 90, and took out the BTRs as they came through.
Well, those shots probably saved Bulawayo. I mean, if that car hadn't have been there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we were so grateful. I mean, it was just so incredible. Look, we would probably have had to use the recoilless rifles, and I don't know if they would have been as effective, trying to set them up in the middle of the night. But certainly Skippy, he was an absolute whiz with that armored car, and he took care of those BTRs. But obviously the worst thing was that there we were, sort of 2 o'clock in the morning, shooting out these BTRs in the middle of suburban Bulawayo, and these poor people who lived along the Essexvale Road and in the flats in the Ascot Centre must have thought, well, the war has come to Bulawayo with revenge, So yeah, it was quite unreal. And in the meantime, obviously the situation in Entumbani was unfolding, and plans were being made. I mean, we went into lockdown last year in this country. We put Bulawayo in lockdown in 1981 because the decision was made, obviously, that we didn't want the public to go to work, to be out driving on the roads the following morning. So, but of course, we had no means like you have today to be able to get the message out to everybody. So we were making frantic phone calls to as many people as we knew, as many people as we could think of, to say, "Guys, listen, stay at home tomorrow, don't go to work." And of course, in those days, RBC closed down at like 10, 11 o'clock at night, and only at 6 o'clock the next morning you heard Leslie Sullivan's voice trying to wake up the country. So yeah, we had no means of being able to broadcast in any way to people to stay at home in Bulawayo. So the police had to go out and make sure they went around the suburbs to tell people to stay indoors. And yeah, I mean, talking to people afterwards, they said, "Geez, today, never heard so many lawnmowers going," and in those 3 days that the city was in lockdown.
Graham, it's quite ironic, but this was a watershed moment, and the irony is it was really the RAR in particular, the Rhodesian army, that saved the day for Mugabe, because if the zipper assault had prevailed, the whole balance of power in the country would have changed dramatically. And I think actually at the time, if I remember correctly, Munangagwa did send a message of congratulations or thanks to Mick McKenna or Brigadier Shute, I don't know, but thanking them for what they've done.
Even Joshua Nkomo, he also sent a message of thanks to the RAR. There were newspaper articles, there were newspaper articles about RAR shows its mettle. Thank God for the RAR, and all these things. And even afterwards, in the newspaper articles, there was somebody interviewed a waiter in a hotel, and he said, "I was so grateful for the RAR because they were the proper disciplined soldiers who came in and sorted out the issues that we were facing." Because he said his next door neighbor, these guys arrived there, they weren't sure who they were, but they just shot his next door neighbor. And it was just, I think for the people of Entumbani, it must have been a very difficult situation for them to handle, because I think many of them may have even come from the rural areas, having been through the difficulties of the war in the rural areas and the TTLs, and thought, no, let's go to Bulawayo, it'll be safer there, only to end up with them on your back step.
Graham, let me ask you this: if Nkomo didn't order the assault, who did? Was this a bunch of hotheads at a lower level who just decided to take matters into their own hands and have a crack at Bulawayo? Who would have given that order to move into the city?
You see, as I said, they had liaison officers in the Brady Barracks ops rooms, and obviously they were partial to the knowledge. There was still an element of the conventional forces at Guai River Mine, and the Air Force was put on standby in case any of those vehicles started coming and moving towards Bulawayo. Obviously, Essex Vale, there was a lot more vehicles in Essex Vale, but I think they got the message: no, listen, don't go out anymore, stay where you are. And it was difficult to know. I mean, Brigadier Shute often used to say, the guys in Entumbani were the Charlie Tangos, the terrorists types of Zipra and Zanla. They weren't the conventional forces. So who actually gave the orders, who actually put in the command, whether it came from much higher up, Joshua Nkomo, or whether it was their army commanders, because I understand Lookout Masuku was there, obviously Charles Gray, they were the hierarchy at the time. And yeah, one doesn't really know where that order came, but I think the troops on the ground, their gooks on the ground, just could not handle the situation with each other. And obviously, if you look further in to when the 5th Brigade was deployed into Matabeleland a few years later, and the work that they did, and I don't know if you would ever be able to get Lionel Dyke onto it, because he, after we left RAR, he was tasked with forming the Parachute Battalion, and he was very involved in that situation in Bulawayo. So he would be quite an interesting guy to speak to. And we don't really know where all that information came from, who gave the orders. Difficult to understand, difficult to know. But yeah, we were involved in saving Bulawayo. And then shortly after that, we had all put in our tickets because our year came up in April 1981. And so many of us had left, or were about to leave the battalion, and head in different directions, including Mick McKenna. And yeah, it was a sad day, because we walked out of the barracks with our colors, our green and black colors and insignia. And the following day, they immediately changed to staff corps colours, the red and green stable belts and berets, and yeah, so it was a very sad day. But you can understand why they had done it. The soldiers that were left there, and that was why we, as I say, Mick McKenna asked us to spend that year and make sure that everything was okay for them, and they had to be integrated. And whatever happened after that, I don't know. I hope that they were all okay.
Well, Graham, you did the honourable thing, and I think thanks to you guys, you left the history of the RAR regiment flying high, something to be enormously proud of. And I certainly salute you guys. I think you did the honourable thing, and I'm pleased we managed to get this little bit of our history on the record here. So thanks very much for...
If I can just say one more thing, I sent you that photograph where Prince Charles was at our officers' mess.
Yes.
And one of the traditions that we had was that we had, obviously, with, I think one of our crowning glories in the regiment was the regimental band, and we had a drum skin which was taken from the big bass drum in the band, and all the signatories that we could get of the important people, all the COs who came and took over as COs of the battalion, they signed the drum skin. All the presidents, the prime minister, everybody. But right in the middle of this drum skin was the signature of Queen Elizabeth when she visited Rhodesia. I think it's her brother, but I know it's Prince Charles's uncle, Lord Louis Mountbatten.
Oh, yes, yes.
And when Prince Charles came to, he was, I think, the Commonwealth representative to see the handover of independence in 1980. So they brought him to our barracks simply to come and sign the drum skin, because he saw his mother's signature and his uncle's signature, and he was quite emotional about it. And he signed in between them. So yeah, there were all these fantastic things that we had in the RAR, and like you said, we had a great bunch of disciplined soldiers who were very proud, and it was actually so fantastic to have worked with them. And yeah, if I'd had my time again, I would certainly, my first choice would have been 1 RAR or 2 RAR. We were both fantastic units, and yeah, we did our bit. I know the SAS and the Scouts and RLI did a lot of the important missions, externals and that. So, but we were able to do our bit to fill in as well. And of course, going around the TTLs with African soldiers, you got to know what was right in the crawl that you were watching, and what was something that was not usual, and that they would be able to recognize signs that said there's a problem in this area. So yeah, it was a great couple of years in the RAL.
Well, hats off, Graham.
Thank you.
Well done, and thanks very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Hannes. And the interviews, I'm really enjoying it.
Okay.